The sea was their highway, their shield, and their fortune. Long before Athens dreamed of democracy, and before Rome imagined empire, ships with high-curving prows cut through the blue waters of the Mediterranean, guided by sailors who trusted the stars, the wind, and the memory of distant coastlines. These sailors were Minoans, and they belonged to a civilization that rose not through conquest, but through connection. Legend says their island was ruled by King Minos, a judge so fair that even the gods respected him. His laws were said to come directly from Zeus, delivered in secret within a mountain cave. But behind the myth stands a real society, one that transformed a rugged island into the first great naval power of Europe. Crete, long and mountainous, sits like a bridge between three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Whoever mastered its harbors could touch three worlds. For the Minoans, geography was destiny. Around 3000 BCE, small farming villages dotted the island's valleys and coastal plains. Families grew barley and wheat, pressed olives into oil, raised goats on rocky slopes, and gathered fish and shellfish from the sea. Life was hard, ruled by weather and seasons, but something unusual began to happen. Instead of turning inward, the people of Crete turned outward. They built ships. Not fragile rafts hugging the shoreline, but sturdy wooden vessels capable of crossing open water. These ships carried pottery, oil, wine, and finely crafted tools to distant lands. In return came copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, gold from Egypt, and precious stones from the Near East. Trade transformed everything. Wealth accumulated not in the hands of warrior kings, but in the centers of exchange. Merchants became powerful. Ports became cities. By around 2000 BCE, vast palace complexes rose at Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, and Zakros. These were not fortresses crowned with battlements. They had no thick defensive walls. Instead, they were open, sprawling labyrinths of corridors, stairways, courtyards, and chambers. They served as hubs of government, religion, storage, and craft production all at once. To walk through a Minoan palace was to step into a world alive with color and sound. Sunlight spilled into central courtyards. Perfumed air drifted from storerooms filled with olive oil and wine. Walls were painted with dolphins leaping through waves, lilies blooming in red and blue fields, and athletes vaulting over charging bulls. There were no scenes of conquest. No armies marching. No kings towering above enemies. The arts celebrated motion, rhythm, and harmony with nature. This alone set the Minoans apart from nearly every other ancient civilization. Their religion reflected this worldview. Temples were rare. Instead, sacred spaces appeared in caves dripping with stalactites, on windswept mountaintops, and within palace courtyards. A powerful female figure dominates their imagery, a goddess of fertility, animals, and the living earth itself. She holds snakes or raises her arms in command. She is not distant. She is present in nature, in crops, in storms, and in birth. Priests and priestesses likely led ceremonies involving music, dance, incense, and offerings of wine, grain, and honey. Bull leaping, the most famous Minoan ritual, was not merely sport. Young men and women grasped the horns of charging bulls and vaulted over their backs in a display of agility and bravery. This was sacred theater. The bull symbolized raw power, danger, and the forces of nature. To leap, it was to master chaos without killing it. It was a message about balance. Humans did not dominate the world by destroying it, but by moving with it. The Minoans were also master engineers. Their cities had paved roads and multi-story buildings. Their palaces had drainage systems that carried wastewater away through stone-lined channels. Fresh water flowed through clay pipes. Even their toilets flushed. Some buildings rose 4 or 5 stories high, with wooden beams designed to flex during earthquakes. Light wells brought sunlight deep into interior rooms. These were not crude settlements. They were urban centers, centuries ahead of their time. Writing emerged to manage this complexity. Clay tablets recorded grain deliveries, livestock counts, and trade shipments in a script now called Linear A. We still cannot fully read it. The Minoans left behind thousands of written records, but not their stories, their songs, or their laws. Their language remains locked behind symbols no living person understands. This silence gives their civilization a haunting quality. We see their houses, their tools, their art, but not their thoughts. By 1700 BCE, Minoan influence stretched across the Aegean Sea. Their pottery appears in Egyptian tombs. Their designs are copied in Anatolia and on the Greek mainland. Their merchants walked foreign streets wearing wool cloaks dyed purple and blue. Their ships controlled the trade routes between continents. Pirates faded from the seas, replaced by commercial fleets. The Mediterranean became a web of exchange. Wine from Crete might be poured into a Syrian cup. Egyptian gold might decorate a Cretan necklace. A single Minoan ship could carry ideas from one world to another. Their power did not come from armies, but from reliability. Partners trusted them. Cities welcomed them. The sea lanes stayed open because the Minoans kept them open. This created a long peace across the Aegean. Some later Greeks would remember this era as a golden age, when the seas were safe and justice ruled. And then the earth itself rebelled. Around 1600 BCE, on the island of Thera to the north, a volcano erupted with apocalyptic force. The explosion shattered the island. Ash darkened the sky for days. The sea withdrew and returned as towering waves. Tsunamis slammed into Minoan ports. Ships were thrown onto land. Coastal towns were smashed. Crops failed under blankets of ash. The eruption did not wipe out Crete instantly, but it shattered its confidence and its economy. Trade faltered. Harbors had to be rebuilt. Fields had to be cleared. Food grew scarce. Yet the Minoans endured. Palaces rose again. Frescoes were repainted. Ships sailed once more. But something had shifted. Their supremacy was no longer unchallenged. The Minoans had created a world without fortresses, trusting in ships, diplomacy, and shared prosperity. For centuries, it worked. Their rise was not a story of conquest, but of creativity. They taught the Aegean how to trade, how to build cities, how to paint nature instead of war, and how to turn the sea into a road. But greatness does not protect against change. The very openness that made them powerful made them vulnerable, and the sea that once carried their ships would soon carry new masters. Their story was about to turn. After the great eruption on Thera, the Minoans stood on wounded ground. The balance they had built, between trade and peace, ritual and nature, was beginning to tilt. The sky itself had turned against them. For a civilization built on trade, the interruption was deadly. Cargo that once moved freely now sat stranded. Foreign merchants looked elsewhere. The steady rhythm of exchange that fed the palaces slowed to a dangerous crawl. Earthquakes followed. Crete is restless land, balanced on shifting plates, and in the decades after the eruption, the ground shook again and again. Palace walls cracked. Storerooms collapsed. Whole towns burned when fires spread through fallen buildings. Each reconstruction cost labor, food, and faith. Each rebuilding made the Minoans poorer than before. They rebuilt because they had always rebuilt, but the price was rising. And then came strangers who were not content to trade. Across the Aegean Sea, on the Greek mainland, lived a people who admired Minoan culture, but did not share its trust in peace. The Mycenaeans lived behind walls. Their kings were buried with swords. Their stories were about conquest. They learned to sail from the Minoans, learned to decorate their palaces with Minoan art, and learned how Minoan trade worked. And when Crete weakened, they moved in. At first, they may have arrived as allies. Archaeology shows Mycenaean pottery appearing in Minoan cities. Mycenaean styles mix with Minoan ones, but this blending was not gentle. Around 1450 BCE, fires tore through nearly every major palace on Crete: Knossos, Phaistos, Malea, Zakros. The destruction was sudden and violent. Some cities were never rebuilt. Others rose again, but under new rulers. The writing changed. Linear A vanished. In its place appeared Linear B, an early form of Greek. The language of the Minoans fell silent. The conquerors now kept the records. The gods were still honored, but differently. The rituals remained, but the meaning had shifted. What had been a civilization of merchants and priestesses became a colony of warrior kings. Knossos survived the longest, but not as a Minoan city. It became a Mycenaean headquarters. Taxes were recorded, goods were seized, people were counted like livestock. The old palace was no longer the heart of a shared world. It was a machine for control. But conquest alone does not explain disappearance, for the wider Bronze Age world began to unravel. Around 1200 BCE, cities across the eastern Mediterranean collapsed almost simultaneously. Troy burned. Hittite capitals fell. Egyptian records speak of sea peoples who attacked by land and sea. Trade routes snapped like broken ropes. Without exchange, bronze could not be made, because bronze requires tin, and tin comes from far away. Civilizations that relied on complex supply chains suffocated. Crete was caught in this storm. The Mycenaean rulers who had replaced the Minoans now faced their own disasters. Their cities fell. Their armies shrank. Their kings vanished from history. Knossos was finally abandoned. Roads filled with weeds. Palaces turned into ruins. The harbors that once linked continents stood empty. The Minoans did not die out in a single night. They faded. Their language disappeared first. Their religion followed. Their political system dissolved. Their art lost its voice. Their descendants became villagers, living among the bones of palaces they no longer understood. Greek myths remembered them as something older and stranger. King Minos became a judge of the dead. The palace of Knossos became the labyrinth. The bull-leaping rituals became the tale of the Minotaur. A civilization of dancers, sailors, and goddess worshippers was turned into a story of monsters and mazes. History rarely preserves what it destroys. It reshapes it into legend. So why did the Minoans vanish? Not because of one disaster, but many. Not because of one enemy, but several. Not because of weakness, but because their strength was fragile. They trusted the sea. The sea betrayed them. They relied on trade. Trade collapsed. They built open cities. Invaders learned their paths. They believed in balance. The world chose violence. The Minoans were not conquered by darkness. They were erased by change. Their civilization had no walls, because for centuries it needed none. Their ships were their defense. Their alliances were their shields. Their gods lived in caves and on mountaintops, not behind fortifications. When the storms came, from the earth, from the sea, from human ambition, those beliefs could not hold. And yet, their legacy and influence remained. They taught the Greeks how to build palaces. They taught them how to sail. They taught them how to paint the natural world instead of only war. They taught them how to write, how to trade, how to organize cities. Even after their language died, their ideas survived in others. The Minoans disappeared not into oblivion, but into inheritance. They were the first great civilization of Europe. And like the tide itself, they rose, reshaped the shore, and withdrew, leaving the world forever altered by their passing.